1998, an 8-year-old boy, along with his siblings and few friends, inaugurated United Children, a movement with a vision to create a better world for children. He was inspired by the Mutuhara Kids Society and thus wanted to develop a customized version for his neighborhood. Then they went on to organize their first event, the Avruthu Utsava, and then an Olympics event for the kids in their area. As their scope expanded and aspirations widened, United Children named their organization the Teen Leaders in 2005, trying to address the issues of equal distribution of resources. It was a continuous process of development for his dynamic team, who figured that capacity building was another tool for prosperity for this island nation. The team continued their journey with roaring ideas and believed that change is a possibility. After much debate and brainstorming about the cause and effect on the society, the organization, which commenced as United Children to create a better world, identified and understood that the values they instill and capacity they built was a part of a greater idea of equality and justice. This deliberation that triggered in 2009 continued at length. They inherited a value system to abide by, that is the 30 human rights, and a plan that they adapted to, the United Nations Development Goals.
I was associated with Road to Rights from ever since then. I got myself associated with them. I kind of like a leech or a kudelo kila. So I was like, Ashan, what's happening with Road to Rights? Shall we do something together? Kila? As many as possible. And I believe Sri Lanka being such a beautiful nation, it's small and it's nice and good things come in small packages. I believe so it's actually easy for us to attain or accomplish all of these.
So we need to bring that desire and ability out of each one of us and transform that into an action. So the positive energy of young people and new ideas can truly make an impact to the world.
The People's Choice for the 2018 SDG Action Awards goes to Road to Rights.
I would also like to thank amazing and hardworking Road to Rights volunteers in Sri Lanka. And remember this, we are the last generation to act on climate change.
This is a very important story. The important story. In the midst of COVID-19, it's an historic opportunity to look at the facts of the world as it is, and then to focus on the solutions to some of our greatest problems. In the 75 years since the United Nations was founded, the human race has never had to face a set of challenges like we do right now. But together, we can overcome them. On the 25th of September 2015, all United Nations member states signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals, a set of solutions for the biggest problems the world faces.
So this is a moment to recognize that the way we have been moving leads nowhere and that we need to change course.
All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Warmly welcome you to the Action to Impact Week, which is brought to you by the Road to Rights Foundation, where we discuss achieving sustainable development goals by 2030. The Road to Rights is an award-winning youth-led voluntary organization established in 2009 in Sri Lanka, aimed at supporting and empowering young people through creating opportunities, skills development, creativity, and innovation by taking a human rights-based approach towards peace and sustainable development. The Action to Impact Week is a youth-led national campaign initiated by the Road to Rights to accelerate the progress of localizing sustainable development, because this is a collective effort. This is not something that one person can do. So this is a collective effort. Everyone should get together and contribute, dedicate, and commit ourselves to achieve the SDGs, the 17 SDGs by 2030. The topic for today, the role of media and communication in achieving sustainable development goals. So we have an esteemed panel with us who is ready to answer your questions, as well as the questions that I raise, so on and so forth. So make sure that you raise your questions. You have the privilege of tweeting your questions, and make sure that you use the hashtag Action to Impact when raising your questions. You tweet the questions with hashtag Action to Impact. So let's move on to our panel of speakers. We begin with Mr. Adam Rogers, Communication Advisor at UNDP and Strategic Communication for the SDGs, New York. Hi, Adam. It's great to have you with us. It's a pleasure having you with us, and thank you so much for joining us, even in the midst of a busy schedule. Mr. Sergio Fernandez, de Cordova, Chairman at PV Blick Foundation and co-founder of Infrastructure Media Group Holdings. Mr. Sergio Fernandez, thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Ms. Hawa M. Diallo, Chief of the Civil Society Unit, Department of Global Communications, United Nations, New York. Ms. Hawa, thank you so much for joining us. It's a privilege having you. Thank you so much. And next we have Mr. Niresh Eliathambi, Chief Executive Officer of Commonwealth Business Network. Mr. Niresh Eliathambi, thank you so much for joining. It's a great pleasure having you. And next we have Ms. Natasha Mudhar, founder of The World We Want and Sterling Global. Ms. Natasha, thank you so much. It's a privilege having you with us.
Thank you so much.
So moving on with the conversation, let's start with the opening remarks, where each and every speaker would get 6 minutes to speak and say their opening words. Let's start with Mr. Adam Rogers. Mr. Rogers, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to start just to congratulate you on this incredible initiative, Action to Impact, because indeed that is really what is needed in this decade for action as we move towards the year 2030, is to focus our actions, our individual actions, and the contributions that we can each make towards creating a better world for everyone, everywhere, leaving no one behind. Within the 6 minutes, there's a question that you forwarded to me about what communication can, the role that communication and the media, as sort of a broad topic, can play in achieving the SDGs. There are the global communication strategies, of course. We apologize for the noise. I hope you can hear them in an airport. Can play at the global level, but it's most important to remember that while we can be inspired at the global level, and I would encourage everyone to check out, for example, UN.org/sustainable development. There's a lot of information there that can be had. as well as civil society groups like on Twitter at SDG 2030 is a very good group, and several others. But communication is most effective when it's local. So while we can be inspired globally and take guidance from global documents or global strategies, it's important to remember that our communication is most effective locally and in our spheres of influence. Our peers, reaching out first amongst our friends and family to inspire them to take action for the SDGs. To really encourage people to look within. I've always believed that every person on Earth has a gift, a talent. I call it an SDG talent. And so if we can inspire people to look within, find their talents, and then refine them, and then use them for the betterment of one's community and one's immediate surroundings, then that is a huge contribution. But also, the mass media, if we move out from the local level to newspapers, television, radio, there's a lot of news that's negative, and it's like the consumers want more of the conflict, But if we let the media know that we want good news, and if the media can find those, there's so many amazing stories of success, SDG warriors or what have you, in the trenches, out in the field, working day by day to improve their communities, to improve the lives of people around them, and often they get discouraged. Many of us working in this area, we can easily get discouraged, especially in poor communities where we're surrounded by poverty, we're struggling to make ends meet, to take care of our families. People are, life is very difficult, and they look around and they see that many of the problems they're facing, their needs are unmet because of others' greed. To paraphrase Gandhi, they look at government and big corporations and do they care about it or don't they? It can be overwhelming. So the media can really profile the stories of success, the men and women, young people, youth, people of every, in every faith and gender and orientation or whatever, working to improve the lives of their communities, profiling them and sharing their stories as widely as possible, both so that we can learn from their successes and learn from the failures. Like was it Mandela said that, we never lose, we win or we learn. And so by documenting the efforts that people are making toward achieving the SDGs, even when they don't work, if they're done with pure heart and with the right intention, we can learn from others' failures as well as their successes. So we need to communicate broadly everything so that people can learn, but also to inspire, really to reach out and inspire, is sort of would be my opening statement. I don't know, I haven't had my eye on the clock, but I think we're approaching the 6 minutes. So I think to sum it up, it would be, we all have a talent that we can refine. We all have a different contribution to make. Some might be on climate change, some might be on gender equality, some might be on freshwater resources. We have our talents and our interests. We can't be all 17. We can form partnerships, encourage partnerships, but we should really focus on the areas that we're good at. So finding those talents, inspiring, and sharing those stories as broadly as possible. Let me turn off the mic.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Adam Rogers. I think that is a fitting statement for opening a discussion, a roundtable discussion of this nature. So next, I would like to invite Mr. Sergio. It's over to you for your opening remarks.
Thank you so much, and hello everyone, and thank you for having me. This is just really exciting. We're excited to be here to speak about the power of media. To talk about, as you titled, the role of media and communications in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And to kind of give a little bit of context, the Public Foundation, it's actually pronounced public, not PV Blick. And the Public Foundation is an organization that I started 10 years ago. We're actually celebrating our 10th year this coming March. And during when we launched the foundation, the idea was launched around my background being in the newspaper space, being in media, content creation, and outdoor advertising, sort of culmination of my own background, and seeing that the power of media, right? The power of media. It says my video is not working. Hold on. Hang on one second. Is my video not working? There we
Now
go.
it's okay. Please go ahead. Now we can see you fine.
No worries. I was getting phone calls and I'm like, wait, I am live. So basically, just again, the power of media and the importance that media plays and the importance of content creators, the importance of the new technologies. This is really why we launched Public Foundation as a nonprofit, as an NGO, and as a foundation to really bring together all the different stakeholders, but to really start the journey on educating folks that everyone has a role to play, that everyone, as Adam said, everyone has a role to play, but not just everyone has a role to play, but we all have an opportunity to drive change, right? 10 years ago, when we started this foundation, we did not have the TikToks and Instagram stories and the ability that every single person today has to reach millions of people in minutes, right? And to us, really the dream and the vision of creating Public was to give everyone an opportunity to be a change maker by seeing and using the power of media, data, and technology and how we are transforming. And so the Public Foundation today, we just really, that's been the core. So again, I'm just really excited to be here to speak and to support and be a stakeholder in this conversation. Today, with the work that we do, we run the SDG Media Zone, which is one of the flagship programs at the UN. We have the Data Alliance, where we're bringing together governments from all over the world to educate them about the power of information to create content, information to help advance the SDGs. And myriads of programs. We have over 100 different programs that we're involved in. And, for us, the currency of media and then the fact that everybody here listening can influence someone else, can educate, not just influence. The word influence is me telling you to believe in what I believe, right? And basically what we try to do with Public Foundation is actually educate people to create their own decisions, educate people with information, with data, with ways by which they could themselves come to their own conclusion and saying, hey, you know what, I love the SDGs, but I only care about 11, 13, and 17, right? So there is plenty there for all of us to be able to be inspired, educated, activated, and utilize our means and our tools around us, our networks, our friends, our families, our businesses, to help create information, content, communication strategies that will bring us together in a world that is inherently becomes so divided, right? The way we communicate with each other, the way we treat each other is all how the role that media plays. So, again, just really excited. I could talk about this for hours, not minutes, but I want to be also respectful of the 6 minutes. And again, congratulations on putting this vision together. Again, I'm biased because that's what we focus on. But just really excited and honored to be here. So thank you, and apologies for the technical issues in the beginning.
No problem. Thank you so much, Mr. Sergio. Thank you so much, Chairman of the Public Foundation. And next we have Ms. Hawa M. Diallo. So to you for your opening remarks.
Thanks so much, everybody. Greetings in all the different time zones. Really happy to be here, and also echoing the congratulations for really putting this dynamic session together. It's like a week really full of power, and really excited that it's focused on something that it is really, core to the UN work, media and the SDGs. And I love that action, hashtag action to impact. I know that when I was thinking about this session, I was like, okay, what does media mean to me? I work in the Department of Global Communications, and I kept thinking, even for me, working in this department, thinking about the collective ways in which we communicate, the different sources, new and traditional media, whether it's TV, radio, newspaper, internet, social media, or blogs. And then thinking about media in terms of the collective body of content providers, as was just explained, that these two parts of media, in my understanding, that they're, in sync, and that the people who are content providers, regardless of what topic they're focused on, are really, true to the information that they're providing, that it's accurate, it's verified, it's trustworthy. I mean, because today media in all its forms and as content providers has really become an important part of everything that we do and in every way that we communicate. And it affects the way that we think, the way that we shape our lives, the way that, you know, we educate ourselves, whether it's informally or traditional education, and just the way we shape society. So for me, it's, you know, with those things in mind that I proudly, serve the United Nations and the Department of Global Communications. You know, we used to be called Department of Public Information, created way back when the UN started in 1946. And I think, you know, we focused a lot on traditional media, but as the information technology has exploded, you know, we've changed our name to Department of Global Communications, really thinking like what Adam says, you know, information is global, but it should be very local as well. It should be locally adapted. We should be able to reach and touch people in different regions, in their languages, within their various, you know, contexts. So the role really that we use as content providers, as people using various forms of media, is to really tell the UN story across, you know, various type of platforms, whether it's digital, whether it's traditional. And, you know, of course, we're doing this to build support for the UN's work, but specifically for understanding, raising awareness on the Sustainable Development Goals or global goals as they're known, you know, in various parts of the world. I like what Sergio said, you know, everyone has a role to play. And I think Adam said the same thing, whether you're a young person, whether you're civil society, whether you're the UN, whether you're government, whether you're, you know, somebody in a local community. You know, the SDGs is something that belongs to you. And I think there are various ways in which we as individuals also can use different forms of media to promote the SDGs. I mean, there are citizen journalists, there are youth journalists. So it's not only the United Nations of governments that are using various forms to promote the SDGs. For us in the Department of Global Communications, we have UN information centers, to speak to what Adam was saying, in over 60 countries that really locally adapt information, specifically SDGs. That's the core of everything that we do. And, you know, they're reaching millions and millions of people with really trusted and accurate information, you know, whether, again, it's civil society, private sector, to really engage people in the work of the UN. And what's really cool is they're communicating, or we are communicating, in more than 80 languages. I'm from Sierra Leone in West Africa. I'm still waiting for the UN to communicate in Mende or in Creole, but I think they communicate in Pidgin along West Africa. So I think it's important that it's a two-way communication, not only on the SDGs, but really multilingualism on all the work of the United Nations. You know, you can go to the UN website, un.org. There's a hub on the SDGs that you can take a look at. The UN itself, the whole system is using various forms of media, traditional and new, to get out the word of the UN, get out the word of the SDGs. For the Department of Global Communications, you know, monthly, there's a goal of the month that we blast all over to focus on one of the 17 SDGs. There've been really some cool initiatives using various forms, mostly social media, to communicate. For example, there's a whole social media work on climate superheroes, you know, animation for young kids, because there's no age limit here. It's intergenerational. One, you know, media form that I like is through a social media app called Act Now. I talk about it all the time because it focuses on how people in their everyday life can make a difference in achieving the SDGs. So one of the things that I do on the app, you know, I've gone in and I've signed up to turn off lights when I leave a room. I always talk about loving showers, hot showers, reducing the amount of water I use and the temperature. And I'm thinking now, what's a third one I could think about? I don't know if you're moviegoers, but with the creative community work of the department, we've worked with Shark Tank. It's an American-based program where people are pitching stories, but through that we've had public announcements on the SDGs, which really, meets an audience that we would normally not see through, the medium of TV. And I think Sergio mentioned the SDG media zones, which are really a cool way to reach out and really to bridge, member states, celebrities, young people, and the general public to talk about how they're achieving the SDGs. So again, everybody has a role to play. It's not something that's far-fetched. It's something that's in our midst, and many of us are using various means, traditional and new, to achieve the SDGs. And for me, it's an exciting moment, to be alive and to be part of something that can really pave the way in terms of the future that we will see and that we will have. Once again, thank you so much for inviting me. I look forward to communicating and interacting with everyone. Over to you, Mr. Diaz.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hawa and Diallo. You actually touched on some important points which all of us should think about, and the various forms of communication, media, so on and so forth. In an evolving world, we have to make sure that we use all these platforms to promote or raise awareness on sustainable development goals. So thank you very much once again for your opening remarks, Ms. Hawa M. Diallo. So next we have Mr. Niresh Eliathambi, Chief Executive Officer of the Commonwealth Business Network. Mr. Eliathambi, it's over to you.
Hi, thank you, Sasanka. Just a slight correction there. I'm no longer CEO of the Commonwealth Business Network. I am a columnist on sustainable development for a national daily newspaper, and I'm a media trainer as well. I was formerly editor of a newspaper.
That is more relatable as well.
Yes, definitely. So let me tell you that everyone's congratulating you on organizing this, and that tells us something, that it's a rarity to have such events organized, especially in Sri Lanka, and that's not good. We need more such events, and these should be run-of-the-mill everyday discussions going on, because SDGs are not the planet's future, it's the planet's present. We see it all over, what's happening all over the world, that SDGs are absolutely vital and not something that we can sort of put on the back burner. And it's got to be understood now by number one, policymakers, and number two, the general public. Especially in countries like Sri Lanka, which are democracies, one needs public pressure on policymakers. So one of the biggest issues here in Sri Lanka is that our media houses are highly politicized, and they concentrate on politics and sports and entertainment. There's very little on scientific and progressive and developmental, social, environmental areas. So that's a huge problem. And I'm talking about all types of media and social media, which are just, the focus is absolutely askew, and it seems to be going in the wrong direction. So when one analyzes why this is, one major reason is that negative news all around the world seems to be what the general public wants. It's sensationalism and not well thought out pieces which are researched. So this is a huge problem. I'm not going to simply blame the electronic media and social media for that. It's something which occurred over decades. I started out in newspapers and I've covered all types of media. and it's prevalent everywhere, negative news. So when you talk of SDGs, you have to talk of the positive aspect, what's good about it, why it's important. It's developmental journalism. And unfortunately, we are in an era of shallow journalism all over the world, and especially in countries like Sri Lanka, where there is far too much coverage on society's politics and violence and all that. That is, of course, a reflection of society as a whole, so that needs to be covered, but that tends to drown out the developmental journalism aspect. And so you have fewer and fewer journalists going into those areas because it takes a lot of time to research, to interview. If you're going to interview someone on SDGs, that you have to do your background research before you go, spend several hours on it. However, if you're going to interview a cabinet minister on something, well, you don't need to research anything. So it's too easy, or a sports personality. So it's just too easy. It's shallow journalism. In this background, it is vital that academia, the academic world, should step up and do its part and forge a link, a stronger link with the media. And one sees that in the so-called developed countries, where academia is very strong, universities and research organizations and so on. Unfortunately, speaking here in Sri Lanka, this is not so. We have a fair number of universities, but they are focused on churning out graduates of the bachelor's level who don't do a lot of research, and you can get a bachelor's degree in Sri Lanka without publishing any papers. So there's not a lot of focus on research, and fewer people go into postgraduate degrees, and the vast majority seem to be MBAs. So again, there's not a lot of research being done, which can be published either in the media or in academic journals. When you look at citations of Sri Lankan authors, it's absolutely pitiful. And there's very few citations, so that means there's very little research, proper research to international standards. What that means is that our universities are at a very low level in terms of research and in terms of the lecturing staff. So these are issues. It's a further issue which compounds the problem of the mass media, because there is no proper academic world backing, and pressurizing about issues which are important to SDGs. So as a result, what's the result of all that? We have policymakers who are not very well educated in Sri Lanka, who are taking ad hoc decisions without proper access to well-researched academic articles or policy supporting articles. We have a cabinet of ministers which takes decisions along political and financial lines. This is so with every regime we've seen in Sri Lanka. And unfortunately, nobody seems to really look at things like, important aspects such as the SDGs when such policies are being drafted or changed. So we have, and this is so in all aspects, whether you're talking about the legal regime in Sri Lanka, or if it's agricultural, economic, financial, developmental, whether you're talking irrigation or whatever. So if SDGs don't come to the fore, then we have a massive problem where we know there are such things as SDGs, and the UN, you go to the UN website and it's magnificent. I mean, you can really learn a lot, with those. But how many of Sri Lanka's journalists and academics actually go to those sites and read them properly? So there needs to be a lot more connection and connectivity between SDGs and the media. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Niresh Kaliyakampi, for those wonderful opening remarks. Very insightful, I would say. And what you mentioned is true, especially in part of journalists. There is a part of research to be done, as you mentioned, when interviewing someone, a guest. You need to do your background work, so on and so forth. That is so true. Thank you very much for those wonderful remarks. And next, we're going to move on to Ms. Natasha Budar, founder of The World We Want and Sterling Global. Ms. Natasha, it's over to you.
Thank you so much. I don't know how I'm going to match the pace and the content of what all of you esteemed speakers have been sharing today, and it's extremely inspiring, and I've learned a lot today from all of you. But I think just to begin with, the world we want. I think the world we want for me is a outcome of some of the personal circumstances that my family have experienced. I am very grateful to say that I think being born and brought up in the household I have, and being around the individuals and that I've been exposed to, and especially my family members, I think I personally have probably lived a very privileged background in comparison to what my mother went through, or what my grandmother went through. But it doesn't mean sometimes that you have to have lived experiences per se to be a change maker, or to feel compelled and want to create change for yourself and for others in your society as well. And I think if anything, I've used their experiences to fuel my purpose, my energy, my passion in creating the world we want. So yes, one of the biggest reasons I launched the company was when I learned that my great-grandmother from northern India in Punjab was an educationalist, but she sadly passed away when my grandmother was just 2 years old from tuberculosis, which is pretty treatable in today's day and age. Now, that meant that when my grandmother migrated to Kenya for various circumstances, that she dropped school at the age of 10 and married at the age of 15. And it made me, ask the question, had my grandmother's mother been alive in her life, as an educationist, would she have allowed her daughter to have dropped education and to have got married at the age of 15? So, related to that is one very big, important point that I really hold dear to my heart, is the point that you can only fight for your rights if you know what your rights are in the first place. And that's where the power of communication comes in, education and awareness. Once you're aware of what your rights are, will you be better informed? You have better decision-making skills as well to fight for those rights as well, for yourself and for others as well. So that also helps you to, it inspires you to be a lot more purposeful with the way you kind of operate in life too. So the world we want essentially is an enterprise. It's focused on purely accelerating the Sustainable Development Goals. It's focused on positive action. It's focused on strategic communication. It's also focused on global connections and really fostering some powerful and sustained social impact through those elements. So action, communications, and those connections. And one other point that I always remember in my work is that there's not a single institution in the world that holds the key to solving all of the world's problems. Just in the same way, Not one institution can be apportioned all of the blame as well. And that's why it's so important that we need to have multi-sector stakeholder collaborations, which I know everybody has been touching on today. And by those multi-stakeholder collaborations, we're not just talking about governments and businesses talking to each other. I'm talking about celebrities, NGOs, not-for-profits, individualists, technologists, educationalists, change makers, campaigners, activists, plus entrepreneurs and philanthropists and ministers, etc. Everybody coming together in a cross-collaborative way to fight those problems and to find those solutions as well. And essentially, the world we want is also about decentralizing that conversation about the SDGs, because I feel that's probably one of the biggest issues that the Millennium Development Goals face. Not many people knew about them. So through the power of communication, through storytelling, through really kind of igniting empathy and meaningful connections and conversations with your fellow peers and, the society at large, can you help to accelerate progress as well? So decentralize that conversation so that it becomes household chatter. And that's where popular culture stars are also very supportive in those efforts. And I've seen this firsthand. I've worked on, orchestrating the international comms for a very interesting film called Padman, which was the world's first film on menstruation. It's a Bollywood film, but it really got pads and menstruations and period poverty out there. But we used Bollywood, we used music, we used the canvas of cinema to educate and communicate those messages as well. And that's really important. And I think that's what everyone's raised today as well, contextualizing your message, to localize it, to make it relevant to the audiences that you're talking to as well. That's kind of essential to everything that we're doing. So so as a marketer at heart, education and awareness. But we can't just stop there. We've got to, whatever we learn, whatever informed decisions that we have, we've got to convert that education and awareness into real form of inspired action. Because that's only when, you will see change. And as Gandhi would say, you could be the change that we wish to see as well. By closing that loop between education, awareness, and converting that into real form of action.
Thank you very much, Ms. Natasha. Inspiring story, and I think, as you mentioned, using various forms of communication like movies, humans understand lessons through a demonstration. That's human nature. If you ask someone to do or not to do something, it doesn't work at all times. Mm-hmm. But if you demonstrate and show it in the form of a movie or a short movie or whatever form of communication, that really impacts, and then it's very effective. So thank you so much for those wonderful opening remarks, Ms. Natasha. And ladies and gentlemen, now we are about to move into the next round of questions, which will be directed to each and every esteemed speaker we have this evening. So before that, you can send in your questions. Don't forget to use the hashtag #ActionToImpact. When you're sending your questions, use the hashtag #ActionToImpact. So the first, next round of questions, I would like to start with Mr. Adam Rogers. Mr. Rogers, listening to the opening remarks of all these esteemed speakers, including yourself, my first question is to you is, what points or what qualities or recommendations should we consider when formulating a communication strategy to raise awareness on sustainable development goals?
And thank you for that question. And also just like to draw reference to Natasha mentioning Padman. Excellent film, one of my favorite all-time movies. Good music, great message, and really overall, really good film. Padman, I recommend it if anybody hasn't seen it to watch it. In formulating a communication strategy, it's first and foremost most important to know your target audience and know what it is that you want to communicate to inspire a shift in thinking or a shift in behavior. Communication strategy must be action-oriented toward a result or an outcome. And so being very clear on your target audience and the appropriate message and the appropriate channel to reach that target audience. And then always have a feedback loop, always have a two-way. Because a one-way communication is basically like propaganda or a diatribe that doesn't often connect. But when you connect with your target audience and you have clear messages and you engage with them, your communication strategy will be much more effective. I'd also like to draw reference to something we mentioned earlier with the role of the media in achieving the SDGs, aside from telling inspiring stories and of success and sharing information on the SDGs. But the media has a very important role to play vis-a-vis its responsibilities of the fourth estate. You know, it's really the fourth estate. We have the executive, the legislative, the judicial. The media is there to shine a spotlight on the failures when our public officials, you know, to make them accountable, to shine, to raise awareness of the shortcomings of, say, of government if they're not, if they're leaving people behind, you know, if they're the vulnerable or being left behind in some public policies, or the disabled or women aren't being empowered and aren't to have an active and equal role with men in public, this public spheres of governance. The media is there to report on that. And when corporations, when they're minimizing they're externalizing their costs by polluting, or if they're exploiting labor, if they're breaking into internet, you know, so many companies are really trying to do the right thing, but there is greenwashing, and the role of the media is to expose that. And they take a tremendous risk because journalists are in harm's way by telling the truth. And so the public needs to support them. You know, often, you know, since the advent of the internet and social media, people are getting used to getting their information without paying for it. You know, we used to pay for newspapers. But what that's done is it's reduced the budgets for investigative journalism. And so some media outlets, they might just take a press release and print it as news. Now that's a mistake for them, for the media to do that, because the media is there kind of act as a filter of truth, to triangulate information before making it public. Taking a press release, but then following up with interviews. But because of the limited resources, or sometimes maybe being lazy or whatever reason, they're not doing that. So we need to kind of encourage media. If we can buy the newspaper, they don't buy it, or if we can pay a small subscription online for the information, that helps these media outlets to pay their journalists to do their work. If they have rents to pay and families to feed, et cetera, et cetera. And so we need to work with the media and let them know, you know, writing letters to the editor when we see a good story, or if there's a report of it, and let them know that this, you know, they're sort of our extension and looking after our best interest. So I think that's a very important role of the media as the fourth estate in holding our government officials accountable and exposing, you know, everything from corruption is a big obstacle to achieving the SDGs. So when we can expose that and hold people accountable, then that moves us in the right direction. I have my flight to catch. Very sorry, but I'm going to, afterwards, when I get to where I'm going at the end of the day, look for the recording and see the rest of the session. So it's been a great pleasure being here with the rest of my colleagues on this panel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adam Rogers. Thank you so much. Have a safe flight. Let's move on with the conversation. It was a pleasure having Mr. Adam Rogers. Let's move on with the conversation. My next question is to Ms. Hawa M. Diallo. Hawa, you have a diverse experience. You are a diverse professional, and you've worked in various setups, and as an individual engaged in the United Nations since 1986, what is the biggest challenge in communication you faced when dealing with various parties from across the globe, Ms. Hawa?
Thanks so much. I'm thinking of so many examples.
Yes, definitely. You should have many. You definitely should have many, but we would like to listen to.
I think, you know, I mean, I've been like on field missions sometimes, you know, away from a duty station. I've been privileged to really work face to face with beneficiaries. And I know that some situations have arrived when, you know, the message just totally goes in the wrong direction. It goes in the wrong way. You know, the message is not targeting the beneficiaries or focused on what is important to the people that we're trying to reach and the people that we're trying to support. So I think that's something that I quickly learned. It seems like it's one-on-one communications, but sometimes it gets lost in project documents. It gets lost in our desire to help people that it's important to consult the local context and to really tailor, locally adapt your information to the realities on the ground. And that could be language, but it could be the context. Like, I can't come with a big human rights story when people are hungry, So, communicating human rights is very important, but also being aware of what the local situation is and addressing or communicating on that aspect, and then looking to see how I can, interweave that message of human rights, in that communication that is of most importance to the people at hand. So I think that's something really that has helped me really a lot in communicating for the United Nations. A second example is just when sometimes you have so many different parties and everybody comes with their own agenda. How do you get people to communicate in a common and collaborative way? That's a struggle I think you find everywhere, not only at the United Nations, and then finding ways of means to sort of find a common, a common issue or a common belief or a common want that people can rally around, even though they're communicating in different ways or through different means, but they are at the core really concerned and communicating about the same thing. Those are just two examples, and I think I've gotten better in the years that I've worked at the UN. Over to you.
Absolutely. So I think, as I said earlier, you have plenty of experiences. So my next question to you is, you have directly involved with the United Nations and the partnerships with NGOs. Is there any example or experience that you can recall in terms of miscommunication, which will be a lesson to the audience, because we have plenty of journalists joining this session, Ms. Hawa. So if you could recall one of those experiences and how you overcame that situation, would be absolutely beneficial for our audience.
I'm sorry, you're saying that communicating with NGOs would have had an experience of...
Experience of miscommunication?
Oh, miscommunication, yeah. That even happens, I guess, in just sometimes in our daily interaction. And definitely, whether it's in a local context or maybe even in a global context, is again, making sure that, we are managing expectations and that we're clear and direct in those expectations, because sometimes even when we're speaking and communicating in the same language, there's so many other non-communication values or mannerisms that take place that maybe give people a different understanding from what we want to communicate. So I think that the way that I've worked with that is sometimes before I even go into partnering with an NGO, really learning about that context of the work, the objectives, and how that NGO carries out that work, and seeing how that aligns with the work that we are doing at the United Nations. And then, trying to, tailor whatever communication platforms or communication, products, we're trying to convey to meet those realities, to meet those expectations of, civil society. For us in the department, civil society organizations are our information ambassadors. So we really do try. Again, I mentioned the UN information centers. I was just searching, and I see there's an information center in Sri Lanka, and I would encourage the people around the screen who are in Sri Lanka, and I will do the same too, to reach out to my colleagues to see how to better communicate and collaborate on the ground in Sri Lanka, because there is a full office there. And besides the UN Information Center, you have a whole array of UN entities that are on the ground in Sri Lanka. And I think, again, getting to know these entities and these entities getting to know the local context. And when I mean that, I'm a people person. So I mean really getting to know people, not just at a professional level, but interpersonal, interaction, so that I can really understand and not come from an English speaking, come from a UN, or come from an African perspective. If I'm working in Sri Lanka, 110% I become Sri Lankan. So, I mean, that's the way that I've tried to work to avoid these miscommunications. And I must say, I haven't had any major gaffes. And, when there have been, have really tried to find a way to really, as they say, put myself in the shoes of the people or the organization that I'm collaborating with, but at the same time, helping them to understand what the UN can and cannot do. Over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ms. Hawa. We will come back to you. So next, I would like to move on to Mr. Niresh Eliathambi. Mr. Eliathambi, you as a media trainer, I would like to ask this question. Are you satisfied with the current role played by global media organizations in raising awareness on SDGs?
Absolutely not. Global media is setting the wrong trend. I mean, when you look at some of the leading media organizations in the world, and I do not want to point fingers, but pretty much across the board, the Western media and even the larger networks in Asia, they tend to go the same way, sensationalizing news and not going in depth. This is not to say that these networks don't do the work. If you go to their websites, they've got some excellent articles on related to SDGs. But when you go to their TV news, for example, you've just got all the sensational stuff, and that's unfortunate. What percentage of the public actually goes to their websites and goes through it, digs through it? No, it's very low. So it's a spin-off effect. Our local media in Sri Lanka will try to copy or ape those international organizations, and not to say that they do it very well, but they're taking the wrong cues, the wrong examples, and therefore it's a great pity. It is absolutely a great pity, and by and large, SDGs, the coverage should be coming from developing nations, which is another issue in global media, because it's a global Western bias here, where the larger media organizations are simply in the West. So if one person gets shot in New York, that's huge news around the world. But if 20 people die in Sierra Leone, it doesn't make the news at all. Whereas if it's about SDGs in Mongolia or Laos, you're not going to get any play at all. So unfortunately, local media takes these cues and has much less interest in these areas which are vital to SDGs. And as a media trainer, I must say that there's a huge dearth of media training in Sri Lanka. Most media organizations simply don't bother about training. They just throw their new recruits into the front line, a couple of months on the job training with some of the senior people, and there they go, they're on their own. And that's not good enough. You need, journalism, media, all forms of media. It's a profession, and you need to study it. There's the academic side, there's the professional side, and the technical side. So you need to know all about it and learn it. And I'd say in Sri Lanka, there's very few journalists who are actually properly, qualified. And unfortunately, this seems to be going in the wrong direction, because we find that most of the coverage on SDGs and development is coming from older journalists, which it shouldn't be that way. It should be the younger ones. It's their planet. I mean, I'm writing on SDGs and I'm in my 50s. I know people who are in their 70s who are writing this stuff. And I'm wondering, well, what about the young journalists in their 20s and 30s? And unfortunately, they're not getting the proper training, so they don't get what positive developmental journalism is. So they're into the negative cycle. So yeah, unfortunately, yeah. So to answer your question, the global media is setting the wrong example, and local media is not getting trained. So yeah, we've got a serious problem here, and this includes social media, by the way.
Is there any way that you think that this can be changed?
Oh yes, I mean, it can be changed very easily. Number one,
I think in a media trainer's perspective, it would be useful for our audience, because we have plenty of journalists joining this call and also joining the live stream, Mr. Niresh. So I think that will be very beneficial for them. What do you think that we need to do?
Well, number one, media institutes need to stop taking untrained people. There needs to be a certain level of qualifications. I'm not talking a degree level. I'm talking at least a 6-month diploma, or preferably a 1-year diploma, before they are let loose to educate the general public. Because, I'm also a lecturer in various aspects, and there's very little difference between journalism and lecturing. You're gathering information and you are teaching people, so when you're writing a newspaper article or you're doing something for television news, you are the messenger, you're the teacher, so you need to understand what you're teaching, and not simply, parrot something which some minister has said. So journalists at the lowest levels need to be trained before they're inducted in. And then the training has to be recurrent. It has to continue. Just because you got your 1-year diploma does not mean that, 15 years down the road that your level is current. So the recurrent training has to be given, and that needs to be made mandatory. So that's, there we run into a certain issue about the freedom of speech and expression, because technically anyone can be a journalist and be, have their own newspaper or a blog or a radio station. So it has, you need a balance. But professional media organizations, large ones like national newspapers, national TV stations, the larger websites and social media, they need to get together and have a standard for their level of new people.
All right, Mr. Niresh, thank you very much. We will come back to you again. So next, I would like to move into Mr. Sergio Fernandez de Cordova, Chairman of the Public Foundation. Mr. Sergio, my question to you is, we talk about gender equality and issues revolving around gender equality. What is the role of men in media? Would it be stronger to have more men and focus on gender equality when it comes to media?
Thank you for that question. I also wanted to just take a step back for 1 minute on what was just being talked about, because I actually had some input on that. And I think in order to change, and having come from the media background, that used to own newspapers and different media companies, is that the problem that exists today with impact making its way into mainstream is that there is no economic engine that drives it. There is no value proposition that allows the good news. I used to run 9 newspapers where we basically made no money. It was pretty much a nonprofit because we would not publish bad news. We only published good news about the community, connecting people, the history of the gentleman who owned the pizzeria, who brought his family of 3 to the United States, and he wasn't even Italian, but he made the best pizza in town, right? The story about, the women that started their own business in a little community, who was an immigrant, who spoke amazing English and wouldn't tell everyone that she was an immigrant. Like, these real human stories. We told these stories to connect community, but nobody wanted to buy advertising because they said, no, there is nothing sexy in your newspapers. There's nothing sexy that you, and I was like, but it is sexy to tell a story. It's amazing. It's human. Don't you want to know your neighbors? But people just, unfortunately, the reality of where the media world is today, it is still very much focused. Even if you look at the films, if you look at the content creation, that we've been at this for a very long time, and the economic model needs to change. To me, the pandemic has awoken people a little bit more, thank God, that, hey, we do need each other. We do need to actually focus. You saw the most recent, report on our climate crisis. It's really worse than what we thought. We're very active in that space as well, and communicating people to educate, right? We saw so many stories about the swans coming back in Venice, and, plant life, really coming back, and animal life actually wandering the streets while we were locked up in cages, our apartments, right? And so, these stories finally made it out, where it actually educated the rest of the global population that we do need to do something about it. And there is, that these are stories that are not being told, as the gentleman said, but it's not just about a lack of education. It's also just a lack of access, right? We tell these stories, we communicate what the UN is doing on a weekly basis. And unless it's something controversial, you don't get 1 million likes, or you don't get 100,000, right? And so, but with something controversial, you'll get millions of people and 600,000 shares. But if it's about, saving the planet, it maybe 2-3 people, they're just not engaged. So I think, part of it is actually how you're engaging society. And yes, going into the gender conversation, I think that the story needs to be told from both sides, right? You need men to help drive the women's conversation. It can't be women for women. We need all the men to step up. We need men to support this conversation, not to create the divide, right? Gender in media is important, not just from a perspective of gender, but the voices that come from different perspectives, right? And not just, women in first world countries, but really, where are the women in second and other economies, right? Why are we supporting that? And there should be, entrepreneurial ventures around media, and also education centers of excellence around how to, create media content. But I think you can't go so far into saying, okay, you should only do good media content, right? It's just create, real life, and it shouldn't be so leaning into any direction, but it should be, in my opinion, very neutral. So we're attracting everybody, and young women and young men to work together, and I think that, that's something that we need both sides at the table, and both sides. And it starts with the generations that are watching us, how we handle this pandemic, right? There's generations of young people that are attached to the screens, and they're watching, and this is the generation that is going to create the most amount of impact in whatever direction it's going to go in the next 20 years. And I think it's just so important from our perspective, everybody here sitting around the table, to actually, not just us talk about this, but what are we doing? How are we implementing things, and how are we taking action and creating leadership?
Absolutely. I think that is an elaborative answer. Thank you so much, Mr. Sergio. I have another question for you, Mr. Sergio. Citizen journalism is absolutely powerful, right? Even if you're not in a media setup, or you don't have prior experience in journalism or working in a media organization, it is so powerful. Sometimes even the journalists from press capture images, or they take the images captured by a citizen journalist. So it's that powerful. When citizen journalism was introduced at the initial stage, even in some of the documentaries, the way they show how powerful it is amazing. So how do you think citizen journalism can make a real impact in raising awareness on sustainable development goals? You're on mute again.
Sticky fingers.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I think citizen journalism is key, but you need a platform that allows you to actually, sort of, there are platforms like, if you recall, when Huffington Post, right? I mean, that sort of micro model, it really took off with an idea of actually getting leaders to create stories and content, right? And there's another platform called like Fair Observer that has a lot of young citizen journalists and research fellows and folks that before did not have an outlet to tell their story. The problem with citizen journalists is, again, you need the mechanism, you need the platforms. They need to be able to onboard to something, not just Facebook, not just Twitter. These are highways. You still need the vehicle to take you across the highways, right? And there are a bunch of, actually, we've had the pleasure of speaking to many of these young startup companies that are coming to us really with a purpose mission. And again, part of their problem that they can't get the funding to build out these citizen journalists, platforms, is that, they lack funding. They lack, and then when they go to these foundations that are throwing millions and billions of dollars into other things, they ultimately don't want to support anything that is telling stories, unfortunately, right? There is, believe it or not, in the world that we live today, it's sad, if we had the capacity, we would support as many as we could, but it's sad to see that a lot of these incredible platforms that are focused on citizen journalism are not surviving. They're not surviving. Fair Observer is one that's really survived, and he was a for-profit, then he turned it into a nonprofit, was able to get some grants, and really supported by the folks. But ultimately, one thing about citizen journalism, and I say this because I had a newspaper, I had a group of newspapers. We had 9 newspapers, small town papers. We distributed to 250,000 homes, so it wasn't anything big. But the problem that we had, biggest problem that we had, is that from us, engaging people to submit content, was editing and just making sure that it wasn't agenda driven. Right. The flip side to citizen journalism is that somebody's got local agendas, political agendas, and how do you create a democratic channel and freedom of speech, while at the same time, making sure that, the platform isn't liable for libel or other issues related to, fact checking and misinformation. Right. I haven't had newspaper, again, been in the newspaper space for 25 years, up until about 10 years ago. And with that, the biggest problem was having the infrastructure to check the information and then publish it, right? So all of that costs money, right? And the idea itself is an absolutely amazing platform, because we need more of that. But I think that it still has a strong future. It's just not going to be AOL. It's not going to be Google, because AOL did patch, right? They all try to figure out what the commercial agenda is. And unless some of these organizations and these big organizations that are out there spending, billions and billions of dollars, there's $2 trillion that are spent on advertising, right? If they're able to put some of those dollars to actually support and sort of these do good causes, we're going to have the same hurdles that we had yesterday, tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sergio. Thank you very much. We will come back to you again. So whatever said and done, sustainable development goals or solving these issues, there is one quality all of us should develop within ourselves, that is empathy. So if you're not empathetic, how would you solve problems? How would you really understand an issue someone else faces? So, Ms. Natasha, I'm moving into you because I think you have some news to share about a wonderful initiative that is We for India, which is about the fundraiser for post-COVID relief work in India. So you can elaborate us on that. And also, as a question, I would like to ask you, how important is engaging celebrity influencers to drive social impact? Ms. Natasha, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'll probably address the second question first about celebrity engagement. I think it goes back to everything I said at the start about the need for multi-sector stakeholders to come on board, which isn't just politics and corporates, but the common man, right through to popular culture figures that you look up to and you're inspired by. So celebrities or icons or artists or authors, individuals who kind of come under the popular culture remit have the influence to influence public opinion. They are idolized, and that's why they must act with a lot of responsibility as well, and really be careful of their actions, because there are a lot of people around them who are watching them, who are aspiring to be like them, to talk like them, to act the way they are as well. So there's a huge responsibility there. They have a massive network, they have a big voice, they have a big persona, they have the celebrity enigma behind them as well, which really enthralls individuals as well. And you do, in a way, without sounding quite negative about it, but you do kind of succumb to the sort of celebrity stardom of things as well, which gives you a very kind of larger than life sort of view of life, which a lot of people aspire to be a part of. And that's why they are so important. If they are harnessed, if they are leveraged for the right reasons, for the right causes, and in the right ways, because like I said, they have a huge responsibility. Anybody who has the opportunity to influence public opinion, government, corporate, celebrity, whoever it might be, the media for that matter, they have a right to be responsible for their actions. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And sometimes you feel that celebrity influencers, or maybe some of the social media influencers, are not playing their part. Or when we feel, or when we see their content, we feel that they can do more, right, in terms of driving social impact. What are your views on this?
I think
how can they change their mindset to in a way that they can drive social impact too, like what you're doing right now?
Well, I think it doesn't just lie with celebrities. I think anybody has the capacity to do anything they want to, and and be that change and drive impact as well. Celebrities are, as you said, they're influencers, right? They help to influence public opinion, just as the media does, just as the government or corporates or businesses do as well, right? So again, it goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. There's not a single institution in the world that you can actually apportion all the blame for all the world's problems, just as though there's not a single institution that holds the key to solving everything. There needs to be that cross-sector collaboration. But anybody who holds a position of power and influence, especially when it comes to influencing attitudes, behaviors, opinions, that sort of thing, whatever they do has to be done with responsibilities. So to the question of what could celebrities do more of, I mean, what could they do more? I mean, you wouldn't expect them to go on social media every day and just keep championing the same cause. But I think what's also very important is whatever anybody does has to be meaningful, has to be natural as well. It can't look contrived. It can't look as though you bought purpose. And there's a lot of purpose washing that's going on in our world at this moment anyway, right? It's cool to be purposeful. It's cool to have a CSR strategy in place for the business, right? So at the end of the day, for me, it's not so much about asserting how purposeful you are, but it's about demonstrating how purposeful you are, because as they say, actions speak louder than words. So a celebrity can go online and talk about a lot of amazing things and, you know, how the change that they're creating, but they've also got to really show it as well. So yeah.
So yes, because sometimes we feel that some influencers, they don't really stick to the meaning of the word influencer. As you said, they have to influence someone. When you look at their content, when we look at their content, we have to be inspired. We should be able to take action on a certain line. So yes, let's move on to some of the questions that we received. But before that, Ms. Natasha, you could tell us about this wonderful initiative, which is the fundraiser for post-COVID relief work in India. Please tell us about it.
Yes, of course, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. But I'm a very big champion, and I've heard Sergio touch on this as well as Howard today, you know, in fact, all the panelists today. I'm a very big champion about the Global South and about bringing power back to people, and how the leadership position shouldn't just come from the West, forgive me for saying it, from the UN, or you have to go to Davos, to the World Economic Forum, to hear all the big decisions in the world being created and impacting the world. But there's also a lot of power and leadership within the Global South. The Global North and the South hold a very transactional relationship, but I think it can become a lot more transformative. And that's why there's a lot of projects that I initiate that are rooted in the Global South, because I believe it's important to give the Global South that leadership position. And in order to kind of contextualize a lot of the issues and the stories and a lot of the points that we've been making today as well, so that they feel they own something. So when you own a particular issue, you're more compelled to do something about it. It's not somebody else's problem. It's, you know, as much as we all want to be global citizens, there needs to be that sort of, you know, relativity towards an issue as well. So We for India is another project that's rooted in India that I've initiated, and it was initiated at the height of the second pandemic in India. We were seeing loads of stories there about, you know, the oxygen cylinders, you know, running out, all of the devastation that the pandemic was causing in India, the lives that were being lost. But then it also occurred to me when you started to hear about stories of COVID orphans, COVID widows, the long-term economic impact. And sometimes we get so focused on the here and the now, rightfully so, because that's all you really think about. You think about where's my next meal going to be coming from, who's going to pay, you know, my salary tomorrow, etc. But at the same time, it's not always just about saving livelihoods, but it's also about protecting livelihoods. And the idea for We for India is a celebrity-driven fundraiser. Is getting global celebrities. Again, it's leveraging the power of popular culture for social good to try and get us and mobilize as much of the public as possible to, you know, come behind this issue and the COVID relief missions that we're raising funds for. So the World We Once conceptualized this idea. I partnered with an amazing company in India called Reliance Entertainment. They're one of the world's biggest Indian media entertainment companies, again in entertainment. And we put together this beautiful fundraiser on India's Independence Day on Sunday to raise much needed fund for post-COVID missions in India. And we've got Give India on board. They're India's largest donations platform. So we've already got pre-committed funds of $3.5 million. And we've got the support of celebrities like Ed Sheeran, Annie Lennox, Nile Rodgers, Sister Sledge featuring Legendary, Nancy Adram, who's the biggest Middle East music artist, Inni, who's a massive Nigerian actress as well, Jay Shetty in America, and over 80 Bollywood actors and actresses and entertainment icons. So the purpose was also to try and keep it quite global. So it's not just about Western stars coming on board to, you know, drive home these messages, but to, again, the West, the East, the North, the South, all coming together to stand with and for India during its time of crisis. So that's the fundraiser this Sunday, streamed live on Facebook globally at 7 p.m. India time. So, you know, I do hope you can join in.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Ms. Natasha talking about We for India. I think it's a fitting example of the blend between strategic communications and empathy. Right. So thank you, Ms. Natasha. We will come back to you again. So let's move on to some questions we received through Twitter. I would like to raise the first question to Mr. Niresh. Nikita is asking, what is expected by the media when reporting SDG-related news? What is expected by the media when reporting SDG-related news?
Well, that's an excellent question. The fact is that, you know, the term SDGs sounds very complicated. Sustainable Development Goal. I mean, it's sort of mind-boggling to the layman. But all it means is building a sustainable future. And the future, like I said, is now. You know, everything's happening now. So what is expected of the media is to bring SDGs into the context of the here and now. What relevance does each SDG have to your life as a person? So that's where the media's job, as we all know, is to inform, educate, and entertain. So let's take the entertain out, but inform and educate definitely the media needs to do where SDGs are concerned. And like I said, this is not, you know, 20 years ago, global warming was a concept. It's not anymore. It's real and it's almost irreversible now. So you know, it's the same thing with all SDGs. We've got to get going on this, and we can't leave it to the politicians and just a few policymakers. It's got to be a massive movement. And it does happen in some countries. It's good to know, like, for example, cleaner fuels and better legal systems, better education, things like that. It does happen in some countries, which shows that it's possible. So here in Sri Lanka, definitely, we need the media to step up and make these SDGs real to the readership, the viewership. That's what we need the media to do.
All right, Mr. Niresh, thank you. Thank you very much for that answer. So next, I would like to raise this question to Mr. Sergio. What concerns and topics the media personnel of Sri Lanka look into when discussing SDGs, especially when let people knowing about the urgency of climate change? You want me to repeat the question?
Yeah, can you repeat the first part? Because the first part was, I just wasn't able to grasp it.
All right. What concerns and topics the media personnel or Sri Lanka look into when discussing SDGs, especially when letting people know about the urgency of climate change?
Well, I think that from our perspective, again, I've not been to Sri Lanka, and I'm really excited and can't wait to go. But you know, I think from a government perspective and from a media community perspective, it's
in a general perspective.
I'm sorry.
In a general perspective, yes.
Yeah, no, of course, that's what I'm saying. In a perspective, because we do a lot of work with many governments in many countries, you know, to me, the most immediate thing is to really educate people. You know, we're launching a campaign in November with the UN around climate, right? And I think when you start to look around climate, one of the most important things that we have forgotten to do, that, you know, goes back to one of the comments that Niresh was saying as well, is that we have to, you know, by giving these young people voices, and the only way to do it is to actually have a targeted conversation. Tell us your story on climate, right? Humanize the conversation, humanize what is actually happening, what that future might look like, right? When the Marshall Islands started to talk about that one day they won't be there, it activated a global community to say, okay, what can I do? How can I help, right? Because sometimes a lot of people talk one way, right? And a lot of the conversations need to be also two-way conversations and saying, we are looking for the help. These are the problems that we have, and what can others do to help, and how can you actually create that content to engage people, right? Not just to educate them. I think the future of sort of media, 4.0 is not just educating, creating awareness, but also what does that engagement look like, right? And learn from the advertising community where they're trying to figure out how to make you purchase, right? Then how can we actually get people to engage and understand the engagement is that transaction, right? How can they learn more about what's going on in Sri Lanka, in the area, in the regions, right? What are the true humanitarian needs, and what are the true local stories that can inspire people around the world? Another example of a country that, did this was, Palau, right? They came up with a creative way to give everybody a stamp on their passport, right, that says that you were part of the solution, right? It engaged people. They created a big communication strategy about why you should be there, why you should visit, because, the urgency was created because of the climate crisis, right? But also at the same time, they also grabbed the best elements of their country and created a campaign that literally won all sorts of awards because it really drove tourism up. It actually engaged more people to want to do something there. It created not only economic impact, it created awareness around climate, and it was highly successful in engaging folks. And I think from Sri Lanka's perspective, it's got an incredible opportunity to celebrate all the richness that the country brings to the world and what it has, and how can that be communicated while at the same time creating a sense of urgency of why people need to look at this now. And that you landed with local stories, human interest. And I think that's my personal opinion with some of the work that we do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sergio, for that answer. That was a question raised by Laknar Jayala. So the next question, I would like to raise it to Ms. Hawa. What would be the role of journalists in monitoring and evaluating SDGs? Can the media get involved?
I'm sorry, my speaker is a little fuzzy today. Can the media?
I will repeat the question. What would be the role of journalists in monitoring and evaluating SDGs? Can the media get involved?
Can they? I'm sorry, my speaker is so bad. I heard the first part. Can the media be involved?
Yes, can the media be involved in monitoring and evaluating the SDGs?
Of course, and I apologize. My speaker is a little off, a little fuzzy. Of course they can. I think they have that role, but I think beyond the media, I think everyone has a role to monitor, to track, and to make people accountable of the SDGs, or the global goals. I think it's Natasha that mentioned it before. The global goals are so different from the Millennium Development Goals that the ownership belongs to the world. It's not just the UN. But I think that distinguished media trainer from Sri Lanka, mentioned, I mean, the media has that role. They're accountable, and so did Adam, of making people accountable, not just raising awareness and telling those stories like all of us have said, but really calling out situations. And sometimes it's very sensitive situations, because the 17 goals really cover so many sensitive issues in many parts of the world: women's rights, consumption of energy. For example, this month is SDG 7 in our department, and it's clean and affordable energies. That has so many things packed into it. It sounds like a simple statement, but I mean, there are North-South relations, there are global South situations. So I think definitely the media, using all of its forms, all of its forces, has that role. And But I think it's important for media also to be responsible, to be accurate, to be trustworthy. As our colleague said, there are a lot of citizen journalists, and I think that is good. But I think there is a difference also with traditional media and journalism, where you have to be sure that the information you're pushing, the things that you are portraying, are verifiable, and that there's some, trustworthiness to it. So yes, the short answer is yes, and they should be every day, 24/7. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hawa. Yes, Mr. Sergio, you have something to say. Please go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for just a quick intervention. I also want to bring folks, because I thought that question was excellent. If you go to sdg.org and alliance.sdg.org, these are the mechanisms that already exist. It's, the SDG Data Alliance is alliance.sdg.org, but the sdg.org domain, it's a platform, is basically the data hub to help not only governments upload and create their their progress reports on the SDGs, but also how citizens and people, young women and men, could access this information and create data stories. Like we have data stories on how people are using the information and in improving what is happening in their local community. So it basically, the architecture, it's working with at the highest level with the government, and then at the citizen level with people being able to use that information. This is mostly data driven, and then we create content and stories around it based on how you use this information to make your community better or in the world at large. But I just thought it was an important tool that people should know it does exist, and it's been around since the SDGs. And this is the mechanism that every single country does their reporting into. Thank you for that.
Yes, Mr. Sergio, if you could repeat those two websites which you just mentioned, that would be very valuable. The two websites?
Absolutely. SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, sdg.org, and alliance.sdg.org. It's just a subdomain of the website. Right. The Alliance was just launched as a means of addressing equity, right? How can we make sure that women and men and most vulnerable have access to information so they too can be part of, the gig economy and beyond?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for having these valuable comments. And let's move on to Danesh Jayasingha's question on Twitter. Ms. Natasha, over to you. How can media and information literacy be properly articulated in meeting sustainable development goals in countries with poverty?
I don't think I quite understand the question. Sorry, how can media?
I will repeat the question. How can media and information literacy be properly articulated in meeting sustainable development goals in countries with poverty?
Okay, so I'm guessing is alluding to the fact if there's countries where there's a high literacy population or something, or where maybe newspapers or written material isn't the kind of common media communication. Right. Understood. Well, I think we've got to remember that written forms of communication isn't the most popular form of communication generally. I know radio, for instance, still in a lot of the developing nations is the primary form of communication, and of course our lovely mobile phones. So there's so many different ways of communicating, and you can't just rely on textual. I know even in certain areas in Africa, and also of course in India and other, particularly there, I mean, you still do role plays, you still do street festivals and theatre plays on streets to try and educate citizens about key issues. There's a lot of wall paintings as well, so using art as well to communicate information as well. So text should never be a boundary. Illiteracy should never be a boundary to receiving communication, because again, that communication has to be contextualized. The spoken word is very important. So verbal communication, listening, that's also important as well. So we can't, again, it's very multi-layered, and it has to be multi-layered. I don't think anybody can ever be influenced by one particular media. Talking in marketing terms, you have to see a particular communication message several times for it to even be understood or drilled into your minds as well. So that could be through visual forms, that could be through cinema, that could be through text, that could be through your mobile phone, it could be through a variety of means. So the SDGs in a way is unlimited in terms of understanding and communicating. The SDGs is completely unlimited. You've just got to unlock those possibilities and those opportunities to communicate them.
Yes, Ms. Hawa, you have something to add. Please go ahead.
I just wanted to mention, it's interesting. Thank you so, Natasha, for giving us that context. But I mean, one thing that I've realized also in just, communicating the SDGs is that I find that SDG education is probably deeper in the global South than it is in the, global North. I mean, I live in the United States. I only see the SDGs when I go to work. I don't see them anywhere else. I mentioned one or two initiatives like the Shark Tank, and I remember seeing the public announcement a while ago. Or most recently, there's a movie that's called Peter Rabbit that's come out in the US and in other places. And, my section has worked to get SDG content in that. But those are far and in between. But I think that in the global South, I think there's a more conscious effort to have SDGs in education curricula. And I think that's something we need to work more in the global North. That, you hear the big names, in some countries, but when you really think about it, across the board, I think more effort really needs to be made by governments, by civil society, in the education, informal as well as formal, in terms of instituting curricula on the SDGs into learning platforms. Thank you so much for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hawa, for adding those wonderful ideas and adding value to the conversation. So I would like to ask the next question from Mr. Nivesh. The question is from Amma. Does investigative journalism play a role in ensuring that lawmakers are held accountable in making regulations?
Lawmakers, oh dear. Okay. Yes, lawmakers should be held accountable. And in countries like Sri Lanka, we don't have enough analysis of what our lawmakers, that's parliament, what they're actually doing. We pay them. We put them up on exalted pedestals. They're in office just a few years and they get pensions for life. They've got all the perks. But what are they doing? Are they making laws? We have, many of the laws which affect the average Sri Lankan in his life every day are laws dating back about 100 years, back to when the British were here. Now the British have changed their laws many times. We've still kept them. That's because our lawmakers don't feel the need to upgrade society. Instead, they are focused on their own petty agendas and interests. So this is where, if I were a young journalist today, which I'm not, it's a gold mine of stories. I mean, and it's easy stuff. Just go in, go and Google what each lawmaker has been doing. How did they vote on each issue? I'm not talking about something about buying a a gun vote or something like that. That's got nothing to do with SDGs. But what about societal issues related to SDGs? And things like justice, global warming. What has each lawmaker done? Have they touched it at all? What has each party done? How have they voted? Remember, when I was a young journalist, we didn't have the internet. But right now, you can Google that stuff. We used to have to smuggle files out from Parliament, risking jail terms. That's what we did. And we wrote this stuff. But now you can just Google it. But it's unfortunately not researched enough, not by academics and not by journalists. So you've got to be able to say, this parliamentarian, this lawmaker, this is how he voted. And this is what he said when he was campaigning. So this actually happens in the developed, so-called developed world. You see it happening in the United States and Europe and so on, but you don't see it happening enough in the developing nations like Sri Lanka. So it's easy stories, and I wish that the young journalists would get into that, because you can really hold those lawmakers up and say, well, this is what you've done in your 2 years in office. What do you have to say about that? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Niresh. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are about to wrap up. So before we wrap up, we have the last question. So this question is to all of you. So you could add your thoughts and answer the question. So the last question from Yasara Ramanayaka through Twitter. What can we do to empower young professional journalists in focusing social impact to inspire and get the community engaged? As young journalists have a key role to play as they are the future agents of change. So how can we empower the young journalists? That's the question in a nutshell. You can take this as an advice. You can give an advice to the budding journalists who are watching this. Let's start with Mr. Sergio.
Thank you so much. So how can we empower young journalists? I think that's a very broad comment that it depends on what vertical you're talking about. I think how can we empower as a community? We need to help give them a voice, right? Get them more involved in this community, in these conversations. Right, a lot of the work that we do, we make sure that there are young women and young men in every conversation, not just the same folks that are having the conversations. Bring them, create the journey so that they could be part of the conversations. They could be inspired. They can engage others. Right. I think I myself, as someone that started very young, I was inspired by watching others, and I wanted to be them. Right. So if we don't have that, we don't need to just look up to a celebrity, to a baseball player, to an Olympian as our sort of leader. It just could be someone in our community that, can open the door, our professor, that in journalism class, right? Why aren't there sort of programs for the young people, right? And then journalism and actually building infrastructure. How do you run a business if you want to start something, or a publishing company or an online platform? And I think that, we need to be part of that solution. I think from a government perspective and NGO perspective, there is a lot of groups that are already there. Join and be part of another organization. Create your network, create your global network, identify with who actually has your voice or is somewhere along the lines. And that's why the beauty of the SDGs is you can actually embrace any aspect. And as long as they're focused on the SDGs, you can actually, onboard into their platform and then define your own voice. Because I think what's really important is that for young people is for them to find their voice. Today, you might think that you're going to, save the whales in the ocean. Tomorrow, you're focused on empowering young women in education in the global South. So it's just, the journey of impact and communications and media and telling that story. It's really, you have to find that voice. And if you don't start, you won't get there. So I think that, that there's a lot of groups as a young person you could be part of, or, we look to how can we create resources and create those leadership opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sergio. Ms. Hawa, ladies and gentlemen, 2 hours have passed. Time flies. So with this, let's move on to Ms. Hawa. What are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I think a lot of what was just said resonates with me also. And, I'm just always so excited and passionate to hear from young people, from any discipline. But again, young journalists, I think, have that special and unique place and responsibility, in carrying forth that message to, to inform and to activate, inspire all of us and not just their peers. I mean, I would say, be fearless, be professional, be accurate, stay true to the journalistic values, regardless of the innovative and new media that you're using. I like what was said, by our, my predecessor, making those networks. No network is ever small. Don't think too much of yourself because you're never too big, to learn from others. And one thing I always tell young people, information is timely, but it also doesn't need to be kept a secret. Be sure to collaborate and to share whatever riches you found within the networks that you delve in. We're saying everybody has a role. Nobody can do this by themselves. Certainly the UN can't. That's why we're actively collaborating with others. So for me, it's always as young people, to be true to yourself. And I say this frankly to young people, you're awesome, but don't get too big for your shoes, because there are lots of seasoned people, who are youthful in mind, who have come before you, who have laid that foundation for you. So be sure to reach out to the intergenerational networks, because you definitely cannot do it alone. But I trust and believe in the work that you have, but know that you have mentors and seasoned experts who are around to work, support, and collaborate with you. Thanks so much for having me on this platform. Over.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hawa, for those wonderful ideas. Great advice to the young people, budding journalists, so on and so forth. So let's move on to Ms. Natasha. What are your thoughts? What is your advice to the youngsters?
I'd say it's a combination of everything that Hawa and Sergio said, but I think in a nutshell, I'll just say, I know we're running out of time as well. So I think it's respecting your voice, your own voice, your power, and your influence as well. So when you have the position to report about a particular issue, you've got to do it with a lot of accountability, with a lot of respect to what you're reporting on as well. Because at the end of the day, whether you're telling one person or 10 people or 1 million people, you're still in a position of influence. And as Hawa said as well, you've got to keep learning. I think our journey is never ending. There's always going to be leaps and bounds and good times, the bad times, etc. as well. You've got to keep learning. You've got to really always have that fire in your belly as well, to want to keep learning, to want to keep understanding the issues, because I don't think anyone's ever going to be able to understand anything in complete totality. And a lot of that goes through experience. So the more you are experienced and the more experiences that you have and the more you can learn from other people, you can actually build a much better, rounded perspective as well. That is empathetic towards other people. So when you're storytelling and when you're reporting as well, you are looking out for other people's interests and not just your own. So respect your voice, your power, your influence, be responsible with your actions, and always have that thirst to keep learning. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Natasha. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those wonderful ideas, comments. Mr. Niresh, let's wrap it up with your thoughts. What do you think? What is your advice as a media trainer to the young journalists?
My advice to young journalists is empower yourself. It's easy enough to do. Don't be lazy. Learn how to Google properly. Don't just Google a keyword and just take the first article that pops up and think you know it all. No, read a cross-section of articles and research, and then you know something about what you will be educating the public on, and whoever you're going to interview and what topic you're covering. And this is where the good old-fashioned journalist covering a beat has to come in. If you are covering health, you need to know everything about health. You don't need to know it like a doctor or a nurse, but you've got to be pretty much up there. So keep your knowledge current, and it's easy enough to do with the internet resources that are there now. So instead of spending so much time chatting with your friends on Facebook, just try to learn something a little bit more and empower yourself. That's what you need to do.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you so much. So I think if you spend a day without learning anything, that day is wasted. So I think all these panelists gave you golden advice, valuable ideas, gained plenty of knowledge, and all in all, it was a fantastic conversation, a media roundtable where we discussed on the role of media and communication in achieving sustainable development goals. So we say thank you very much to our panelists, the esteemed panel who joined with the conversation today. We say thank you very much to Mr. Adam Rogers. He was with us and he was leaving for another destination. So thank you very much, Mr. Adam Rogers, Communication Advisor at UNDP and Strategic Communication for the SDGs in New York. Mr. Sergio Fernandez de Cordova. Mr. Sergio, thank you so much, Chairman of the Public Foundation and co-founder of Ms. Global Communications Nations, New York. Mr. Niresh Eliatambi. Mr. Eliatambi, thank you so much. Columnist on sustainability and trade. And last but not least, Ms. Natasha Budar, founder of The World We Want and Sterling Global. So we would like to wish you success with We4 India, Ms. Natasha. May the campaign become a great success. So ladies and gentlemen, every beginning has an end. So now we have reached the end of this wonderful conversation on the role of media and communication in achieving sustainable development goals. So we say thank you very much to the wonderful audience, the journalists who joined us, and also the people who sent us questions via Twitter and who watched the live stream on YouTube. So credit goes to the Road to Right Foundation for coming up with this wonderful initiative and putting this together, because this is a collective effort. Sustainability is a collective effort. One person cannot do it. So thank you very much to Road to Right. And we are in the Action to Impact Week. So you can stay tuned until the 15th of August, where you will come across impactful conversations with various dignitaries from diverse industries, and you can gain knowledge with joining and share your ideas as well and keep that interaction going until the 15th. So thank you very much once again. So before we wrap up, I would like to mention this quote by Robert Swan. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to the esteemed panel. We hope to see you soon. Thank you very much. Wherever you are in the world, stay safe. Take care. Good night.
Let us strengthen the way we achieve these goals of sustainable development around the globe.
Join us
as we
uplift the lives of many, improving human health and restoring the environment,
empowering women
and protecting children whilst creating a
sustainable nation for. Together, let's action to impact.